Lord, thank you for the time that we have to come to study your word. Lord, we're blessed the freedom in this country and the grace from your Son that we have this time to come and study. As you would have us understand how to live our life in this world. In your Son's name I pray, amen. Before I start, things are getting a little crazy again with the virus. Good news or bad news, depends on how you look at it. The Omicron is extremely contagious, but it doesn't seem to cause anywhere as much of the hospitalization as the Delta. It isn't quite as covered by the vaccine, so if you haven't got your booster, you should definitely get that. And anybody in the family that hasn't had their booster should get it. One of the, you might say, good news, bad news things, it's so contagious, it's possible to burn through all the unvaccinated in the next few months. And maybe the whole thing will burn out to some degree, but we'll just have to wait and see.
What is the worst symptoms?
I'm sorry?
What kind of symptoms do they have?
It's with the Omicron, it's more like a cold symptoms, runny nose, cough, kind of junky. At least that's what I've been told. We haven't had much yet here, but it's starting to pick up. You know, we had over 2,000 today reported and 166 or something on the Big Island or something like that.
Oh, goodness. So are there test kits for the Omicron itself?
Some of the PCR still works, but some of the rapid test kits don't work too well.
Oh.
That's what I've been told. So, if you think you might have had it, you probably should try to get the PCR test to tell. They are coming out, should be released very soon, some pills that work for the virus, much like the pills that work for the flu. There's two medicines. One, basically they're antivirals, much like the flu medications. You've got to take them very early, but it does seem to be very helpful. I'm not exactly sure when it's going to be readily available, though. It's probably going to be a little while.
Is it a shot?
I'm sorry?
Is it a shot?
No, it's a pill.
Oh, pill.
Yeah. And so, for those that have ever taken a Tamiflu, there's a couple others are medicines against the flu. And if you start coming down with the flu and you take it very early, like the first 3 days, it really cuts down how sick you get and how long you're sick. And in places like long-term care, where people can get real sick, if somebody got flu, we normally have given the rest of the residents the Tamiflu. So this is going to be a big game changer, but they have to ramp up production, and they haven't really said exactly how they're going to distribute it. If they're going to initially give it to the hospitals, or when is it going to end up in the pharmacies. But that would be a big game changer. We have a pill for this. So maybe by the summer, we might be more back to normal. I would hope.
Every time we think that, something else comes up.
Well, when I went to Honolulu to see my grandson, my son and the wife have made us take a COVID test because he wanted to carry the baby, that's all. So we were negative,
Oh, good.
so we were able to carry the baby.
Yeah, that's the
I guess
trouble.
just for
The trouble with
prevention,
it's the trouble with babies. It's under 5 still are not authorized to get the vaccine. So the children, young children, are still at risk.
You said that maybe in a month or so, so many people will get it, so you said it would burn itself out. Does that
Well,
mean
that's some
that?
of the epidemiologists are saying that it's so contagious that Remember, right now, we have about 70-some% of the population in Hawaii vaccinated. And so the other 30% get either one of the strains or get the Omicron. We're going to get what they call that herd immunity, where it stops spreading around. But so far, this virus has fooled us, so I'm not going to put any money.
But the 30% includes the 5 and under, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's like 72% fully vaccinated now, or something like that, something close to that. But you're right, it does include the group of people that it's not recommended for yet.
Also, like Dr. Belcher, when we go KTA, the mall, we are exposed to, somebody might have it.
Yeah.
It might be a carrier,
Right?
So that's kind of scary.
That is kind of scary, so back to making good, distance, wearing your mask, washing your hands, and probably
I
not
see there's a
going.
new mask, a fishnet mask. It seems stiffer and more pointy. And they said that's good for the Omicron.
These masks
Yeah.
and the ones that you're wearing really protect you from me. Doesn't protect me from you.
Yeah.
That N95 that you're talking about is the one that protects you, but it needs to be the right size. Because if there's gaps in it, then it doesn't work. Larry would probably find this amusing. The medical professional people get what is called fit tested. They put the mask size that we think it is and put a container over our head and actually spray pepper spray in.
Oh.
I don't know if you react to the pepper spray, then you know it's the wrong size.
Oh.
And so that's what, when they say fit tested, that's what they're talking about. It actually like a bubble gizmo that goes over the head and then they spray something. You don't have to use pepper spray, that's just what they use. Anything that you can smell, But the N95s is the one that protects you. And remember, it's a virus that doesn't last all that long outdoors. So outdoors is the better place if you're going to be talking with people, dealing with people, rather than in an enclosed environment. And you can get it on your hands, and if you have a tendency to touch your face, you can give it to yourself that way. Indoors, it's varying how long they think it can last, but it can last for a while, like on a tabletop. But outdoors is the safest place. So I saw in the newspaper today, Queens is going back to no visitors. I think the other hospitals in Honolulu will follow up pretty soon. We just hope we don't have trouble. Right now, the hospitals really don't have a whole lot of cases of people in the hospital. Remember that the case count happens and then there's a lag, usually a week or two before the hospitalization rate goes up. So really see if this is going to cause a problem. We need to see what's happening in about 2 weeks. And so we get through now Christmas and get through New Year's without big time problems. We'll probably be all right. Any other questions before we actually get into Bible study? Okay, we're going to just start all over again. So Larry, read 8:1, please.
Now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up.
Sorry, just waiting for that to go by. Remember, good part of this letter is Paul's responding to questions from the Corinthians, and this is obviously one that they ask. What about food sacrificed to idols? It was very common, actually the Jews did it, remember? They would sacrifice various foodstuffs, mostly meat, but it could be also bread. They would sacrifice it. Then generally it was the priest and the temple workers that then would consume what was actually not burnt. And the other temples would have very much the same thing. Something would be sacrificed to the temple, to the idol, to the god that the temple was worshiping. And then it became a problem one of two ways. If there was remnants of the food, especially the meat, it was sold in the market. Sometimes you would know it was a leftover, you might say, from the temple, but sometimes you would not. But also people would have gatherings at the temple in which they would eat. They did not have the separation of church and state, or church and social life like we have. I used last week an example. You go to a wedding at, say, the Honganji Hall, you would not expect that you're going to be eating food there that's actually sacrificed to an idol. Admittedly, they don't really have an idol, but that's what we're talking about. That kind of affair where you're going to a religious hall, but it's a social thing, now we consider that completely non-religious, that's social, but back then it was not that clear. People were in a number of organizations that were supportive of each other, usually revolved around some aspect of their life, often their vocation. The Romans did not have any type of social support like we do. And so a lot of these organizations were involved in paying for funerals, paying for birthday parties or other things like that. So there were groups, so they would go to one of these temples that has their organizational meeting. And that was usually involved in having a meal. And since there wasn't a clear separation of the social and the religious, it was always some aspect of religiousness. If a Christian that was, say, worked as a plumber, stopped going to the plumber's meeting and therefore was not engaged with the rest of the plumbers, he would become an outcast and might significantly harm his financial situation. And so Paul's trying to deal with two circumstances. Also, meat was relatively expensive. Who would be of the believers, what group of believers would be able to buy the meat?
Probably the priest, or the more affluent people.
The more affluent people. So people, you were talking earlier about social stratification in the church, and so in some ways it was only the affluent that had money that would be able to go out and buy this meat. And so again, when we're reading the rest of the verses, kind of remember those things. That one, he's talking about meat, in general, meat that was sacrificed to idol, meat that might be sold in the marketplace, where you would or might not know if it was sacrificed or not. And probably the ones that were most impacted were the ones that were more affluent, had a higher social status in the church. What knowledge is he talking about? That we know that we all possess knowledge. What knowledge do you think he's talking about?
Knowledge about God.
Exactly right. And so the first part of this is knowledge about God. We all that became believers have that knowledge. But then, confusingly, in the next section, he talks about other knowledge. Knowledge pops up. He's talking about earthly knowledge there. But what builds up? Love builds up.
Love?
Yeah, love builds up.
I don't understand that.
Tell me what the problem is.
Well, that's why I didn't think knowledge was of God. I thought it was the love is of God, but
Yeah, love is
But
of
he's-
God.
yeah, but it's like,
It's
when
a-
you use but, it's like saying something different from
Yeah, the commentators have a hard time with this right here. That's why most of them feel like what Larry said. The first knowledge he's talking about is the knowledge of God. But there's some that feel that he's talking about knowledge in general,
because of the second.
because of the second half. And so there is an argument about this. So the majority of commentators think that he's talking with the first phrase, the knowledge of God, and then second phrase he's talking about earthly knowledge. But it's not really, even in the Greek, all that clear. So it's one of these where you can interpret it anyway. And as you remember, he's been talking about earthly knowledge not being very useful for the believers. And the love of God, God's love for us, is what builds us up. Do we feel that that is true?
Well, I guess knowledge of God. I guess it could vary, so, but if you have love for God, that's a better foundation that you build for yourself.
I think I agree with you. I didn't quite hear all of that. My hearing's still not the best. But Paul has been talking in the earlier chapters that people that look at earthly knowledge basically do not understand spiritual knowledge. And for us, it's important that we know spiritual knowledge. All of us that have become a believer have the access to spiritual knowledge. But God often makes fools of the wise, is what he said earlier, in the sense that sometimes looking at purely knowledge as an earthly thing, the spiritual knowledge doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's in Proverbs that says, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Yes.
And
so he made...
understanding brings knowledge or something.
And so wisdom, knowledge doesn't always equal wisdom.
Yeah.
Knowledge means knowing something. Wisdom meaning understanding something. And there's, to me, a big difference between the two. Even in this day and age, the people that refuse vaccination have knowledge, but they don't have any wisdom. It might be false knowledge too. Judy?
The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know.
And so again, this is Paul saying, people that have earthly knowledge of things that are going on, does not know what he ought to know. What should he ought to know?
Spiritual
I'm sorry?
Spiritual knowledge.
Yeah, spiritual knowledge. Knowing God. And so if you just know things of the world, you don't know God, that's what you ought to know. 3, Dennis?
The man who knows God is known by God.
But the man who loves God is known by God. So what happens when we love God?
That's how you do things.
Exactly. It affects how we do things. But also if we love God, if we love somebody, what do we know? I just blew my question. If we love somebody, we know them. And so he's saying if you know God and love God, God knows us. We're known by God. And likewise, we're loved by God. And so that's again the distinction between earthly and spiritual knowledge. If you don't know God, you can't love God, and then God can't know you and can't love you. Lynn, 4, please.
So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and there is no God but one.
The Greek in this section has a very unique structure and precision. Another interpretation of what we just read. But to us one God, the Father, from whom all things, and we unto him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom all things, and we through him. Which is the next verse, but I'm sorry, I got lost in my notes, but we'll come back to that. So what's he saying about idols? Do they have any validity? So should we pay attention to the idol if it's not really there? Not really anything there? No. How many gods are there?
Many.
What?
There's one God, but for non-believers, there's many different
Many,
small
many.
g gods.
And they didn't feel any problem with worshiping in multiple temples. You know, each god, you might say, was not jealous of in their point of view, of if you went to the plumber's god and the next time you went to the carpenter's god or whatnot. They didn't feel any problem with that. In fact, they thought that was the way to do things. What? I'm sorry?
I went through the lightning bolt.
Okay.
I've been in other churches, but not to worship. Maybe to attend like a service, funeral service.
Yeah. And so we'll kind of come up to Paul's answers later on in this chapter in a few more verses, but we'll continue. Debbie, fine?
For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords,
The one with 6, please.
yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live, and there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live.
So this section is very close to the Shema, which was the prayer that the Jews did in its structure. And it looks very much like this is a prayer or like a doxology like we would have. So he's quoting most likely something either the churches have been using or something maybe even Paul himself had written was being used. And so he's saying even if there is these other gods, he's not saying there are, he's saying even if they are other gods, for us there's only one. But he implies that, of course, that there isn't any other gods. I know Pastor Ian and Pastor Shane have talked about us having new other gods that keep us away from church. Remember what was some of the ones he talked about?
See,
What's that?
see,
Yeah,
Sports.
sports. Sports is what he's talking about. I think he's mostly talking about football.
PVRs.
I'm sorry?
That's why you have PVRs.
Yeah, that's why we have, and so we can actually come to church and do things. So other earthly things that we put in front of us, whether or not it's sports or a job or this or that. And so they would have preached in the past about that. Joyce, please.
But not everyone knows this. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat such food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to an idol. And since their conscience is good, it is defiled.
So what's he saying here?
if you believe in, sacrifices, then that's when the food, if you eat the food, if you believe that the process that sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
then the food is defiled. But if it doesn't matter to you, food shouldn't.
And so what he's saying is that some of us are weak. Weak in our spiritual life, probably is what he's talking about. And so if we are really strong in our belief, as Larry said, it doesn't matter. We don't believe that there's that God, we don't believe that idol, so there's nothing wrong with doing that, eating that there. We can socialize and we understand that it's not really true. But those of us that are, we might say in these words, weak, might say new or still unsure, that might make a problem for them. They might feel that that's something bad.
Sometimes it's so ingrained though in some people.
Exactly, that's exactly what he's saying. They've been doing it all their life and now they've changed. And so they're accustomed to it, so they can't seem to make the leap from what they used to do to what they're doing now.
It's very interesting. This morning, some of my friends were pounding mochi.
Mm-hmm.
And so they asked me if I wanted to go over, like, yeah, and for me it's almost like a social thing.
Yeah.
And, but it was done at this guy's house, and even they're kind of Buddhist, like church. And even the priest was a Buddhist priest, and they were making these, what they call kazari. Kazari is, different sizes mochi, and then offered to a lot of people on altars at home.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm thinking, hey, it's very religious might be for these guys that I'm participating in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it never occurred to me till now that, hey, maybe I should be participating.
And Paul's going to get into that, but there's two answers to that. One, if you're certain of your faith and you're certain that all other people there or say Buddhist, and they understand where you're coming from, and to me, that situation is probably not a problem. What he's going to talk about is there's people that are, you might say, on the edge or borderline or weak conscience or weak understanding. If that's going to cause a problem for them, not so much for you, then we probably shouldn't do it. And so, if there's somebody you think in that group that might be becoming a believer, and by you doing that might put us, as Paul would say, a stumbling block in front of them, you shouldn't do it. But if these are your friends and they understand you're doing it purely social, I don't think there's a problem with that.
Fertile ground, Dennis. Fertile ground.
I'm sorry?
Harvest.
I'm telling him fertile ground.
Harvesting.
Oh, fertile ground, okay. Yeah, and so, you know, if it's, for you it's purely social and they understand that you're Christian and that aspect of the religious aspect, you're not there for it, just that your friends are still there. I don't have a problem, but if there's somebody that might be a problem, not you, in that group, then that's where the problem is, and that's kind of what he's going to be saying. Let's see, 8, please.
But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do.
And so this is kind of going back to what Larry said. You know, it's not the food itself that makes us a problem. And so whether or not we eat or don't eat, it's the same. What brought us nearer to God? It's not the food, but what brought us nearer to God?
Our relationship, our love.
Yeah. Our faith, our belief brought us nearer to God. And so it's not that we ate something, you know, we do the communion, but that's not what makes us a Christian. It's our belief. We're just commemorating that. And so it's not that makes us a Christian. It's not the baptism that makes us a Christian. It's our belief that makes us a Christian. Okay, back to Larry, please.
Be careful, however, that the exercise of your freedom does not become a stumbling block to the weak.
Okay, so this is that answer that he gives, that you have the freedom to go and socialize with your friends, with them understanding you're not dealing with the religious aspect of the mochi pounding. But if there's somebody that it would be a stumbling block, then you should be careful. You know, you have the freedom to do what you did this morning. If I understood you right, you already did it this morning, correct?
The
Yeah.
problem was coming to church.
I'm sorry? Okay, so you already did it this morning, so if there's nobody that was a stumbling block, it's not a problem. What kind of person do you think it would be that you might cause them to stumble?
A non-believer?
Yeah, non-believers or somebody on
But
the
there
edge.
might be somebody curious, you
Mhm.
know, and might say, oh, Dennis went to church. I wonder, you know, because there was a priest there and everything, he
Mhm.
might be curious and ask Dennis, and that's the fertile ground.
And the advantage of our society is much more clear-cut than back then. The separation of church and state, even social and religious. Obviously, before COVID, we had some social gatherings. We had our own social gatherings. And we had people come that I'm sure were not believers to some of our programs. We actually encourage that because we hope that will lead them to knowing Christ. But it wasn't quite as clear back then, and so it might have been a little harder. Okay, 10, Judy, please.
For anyone with a weak conscience sees you who have this knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't he be emboldened to eat what has been sacrificed to idols?
And so this is his argument next. If somebody is encouraged, if somebody is weak and they see you eating it, they must say, okay, it must be all right, I can do it, and with the understanding that you actually are doing something with that idol. And that would be bad. And so that's what he's saying there. Dennis, 11, please.
So this weak brother, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your image.
And so this is his caveat. This is his where you need to be careful. And so if you have a weak brother, and luckily in our society the separation is a lot clearer, maybe you shouldn't be doing it if it's going to cause the brother to stumble. I'm sure from the way you described it, there was nobody there that was going to stumble. And so next year you should feel comfortable in going doing it. 12, please, Glenn.
When you sin against your brothers in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ.
And so he said, this is where we need to be careful. If we think we're going to be doing something that is going to lead people away from Christ, that's a sin and that's bad. And we shouldn't be doing that. Where would we nowadays have that kind of situation? Can anybody come up with an example? Yeah?
You know, when you go to a Buddhist funeral,
Mm-hmm.
you're asked to offer incense. The family will go up and offer incense, and then you're supposed to bow to the Buddha, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in the front. I think that causes some problem.
And so what do you do?
I always feel, you know, like we're supposed to be aware of other people we could be stumbling blocks to them. But I don't think that way. I always think about what is going on between me and God. I always think that. So whenever that happens in our family, they already know that I will go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't bow, I don't offer incense, but I go up in honor of that person, let's say a relative. But I know I have Christian brothers and sisters who do offer incense though.
You
And
know
I
some that
that's
don't? Have you seen people not go up in these services?
I'm sure there are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've gone to a couple and I haven't gone up.
You have or haven't?
I have not. Yeah, but I think if you go through with the knowledge that you have, that you're really supporting the family and the family understands that, I think that's where he's saying we have this freedom as long as we're not causing a stumbling block, that somebody there thinks, well, she's Christian, but she's really sacrificing to Buddha. I don't understand Buddhism enough to think that maybe that's what they're doing or not. We don't really have idols otherwise that we really sacrifice to, like they did back then.
I know I've been criticized though by the older people in my family. They've already passed on, but then earlier, my aunties and uncles,
Mm-hmm.
they've seen me go up and they've made comments to my mom.
What kind of comments did they make?
Like, I don't know, I don't remember exactly, but like, I'm not showing respect. and what's wrong with me, you know, is that how Christians act? I mean, I know they were very critical, I don't remember the exact word, but my mom, knowing my heart, told me before she died, way before she died, you don't have to offer incense for me. You don't have to do something that's going to make you feel uncomfortable.
So were they thinking that you were dishonoring them
Yes.
by doing the incense when you didn't believe? I could
They
understand.
were critical because I was a Christian too. Or is this how Christians act?
Mhm.
I asked both Ian and Pastor Shane a very same question. Should you offer or shouldn't? It's really up to you. You know, and if you have the, like Lynn said, that's exactly what I do, exactly what I did. I don't offer the incense by my mind. I'm honoring the person that died.
Mhm.
I'm not honoring Buddha. Just to honor the person that died, I go up, I don't offer incense.
Yeah, if you folks are strong in your faith, so that's what he's saying, you have the freedom to do that as long as you're not causing somebody else to fall away in sin. And so if your family, your friends understand, like this mochi pounding this morning, your position and your understanding, then Paul's saying we have the freedom to do that as long as we're not causing somebody else to have a problem. Does that make sense? Well, that's, basically, I think that's how we can function in this kind of world. If you're strong in your faith, now if you have a problem with your faith, or your friend that's going there has a problem with their faith, then you might want to be a little bit more careful. Joy, have you similar experiences?
Yes. Sometimes people will confuse rituals that are intended to honor, like Buddha, versus making it, generalizing it to say that we don't do this, we're disrespecting the family. And there is, to me, there is a difference.
Yes.
So like, I don't offer incense either, but when I do go up, I just say a short prayer for the person and for the family.
Mhm.
And then I go and, greet the family. But I don't offer incense because that offering of incense is intended to be like honoring what you do to honor Buddha. So that is offering.
And to be honest about it, the reason I do it this way is that's the way my wife does it. She goes up just like you, we say a little prayer, but we don't offer the incense, and then we go talk to the family. But that's what she taught me to do, and that's why I do it that way. Anybody else?
Same like Joy, I go up and I don't do the incense part, and I just go and pray. That's it.
I was going to say that I know some Buddhists have a hard time understanding Christian funerals because it's more joyful,
Yeah.
because it's a celebration of life. And I feel like they feel that we should be in mourning. It should be somber.
So why are we joyful?
Because we know where the deceased went. It's
The old phrase, they're in a better place. We believe that they've gone to a better place. And no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering. And so, not unreasonably happy or more joyful. I'm sure we're all grieving to some degree the loss of whoever it is. But when my mother died, she'd been ill and had pretty much bedridden for a number of years. And I knew she was a believer, so when she finally passed, she'd been in Honolulu for a number of years. In some ways, she was no longer suffering, and all the family knew that she was in a better place. But you're right, the Buddhist service I've gone to seems to be very somber. Why do they feel that way?
no hope.
I would say that's a good answer, no hope.
But
There's-
it was more the older generation, I think, that felt that way. I think the newer generation of Buddhists are more open-minded because they've gone to a lot of these other services.
Mhm,
So I don't think they feel the way like my aunties and uncles did.
mhm.
Like, oh, it's not right. You know?
You shouldn't be happy that
Yeah.
Auntie Sarah died, or Auntie's, Debbie died. Sorry to use your names, but, but my understanding of Buddhism is that they might have to go through another cycle of life because they haven't been all that good. And so, like you said, no hope. You're back in the bad situation all over again. So no food in itself is bad. Who's supposed to read? I lost track. Can you look up Romans 14:14?
Okay, Romans
14:14.
14. As one who is in the Lord Jesus, I am fully convinced that no food is unclean in itself. But if anyone regards something as unclean, then for him it is unclean.
So this is kind of, in Romans, Paul's summation of not only food for the idols, but remember the Jews had a number of kosher, what we call kosher laws, things you're not supposed to eat. So what he's saying is the food in itself is okay, but if you believe it's bad, or the circumstances is bad, then it is bad for you. So that's when you need to take care of it. Our knowledge of the Lord allows us freedom, but like all freedoms, there is, you might say, some constraints, some exceptions, something that we need to deal with. And so if we feel that it is not right, well, we shouldn't be doing it. If we feel that we might, in the case of, he's talking about food sacrificed to idols, if we feel that it might cause one of our brothers to stumble, we shouldn't be doing it. But if we are fully engaged with the Lord, like Dennis and Lynn and Joy talking about, then this behavior is fine. Does that make sense, Dennis? I know you were a little concerned about that, but it sounds like you talked to Pastor Shane in the past about that too. Okay. 13, please, Joy.
Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause him to fall.
And so, again, he says, if this is causing your brother a problem, then I won't do it. And he's talking about meat here because, we go, where do we get our meat from? Yeah, supermarket. A few of us hunt. My son hunts. I imagine some other family members hunt. But most of us go down to KTA or Safeway and buy our food there. We don't have that food sacrificed to idols before it comes to the market, but back then they did. And sometimes you wouldn't know if it was or not. And if you felt that if it was going to harm you, then you need to be careful. This finishes this section, and I don't think we have really enough time to get going in the next section of any links, so I think we'll stop here. But I'm going to ask if this causes anybody to have any more questions about this topic. I think Paul's answer in Romans is no food by itself is unclean. But if you feel it's unclean, or the behavior you're doing, this is me adding, then it is unclean. So if you think it's going to harm somebody, you shouldn't be doing it. But I think what Dennis did this morning is not a problem. And I think as long as you are feeling that it's not conflicted yourself, you should be okay, as long as you're not causing one of your brothers to stumble. Any questions about this? We'll start up the next section next Sunday. Lynn, can you close us with prayer today?
We Lord, thank you so much for this beautiful day. Thank you, Lord, that we can get together every Sunday and learn more about your word, Lord. We thank you for Dan's leadership and in everything that he shares with us, that we share with each other, Lord. There's blessings on our lessons each week. And we thank you, Lord, for the events of this past week, that we were able to celebrate your son's birth. And Lord, we ask you to continue